Metal screamed, glass shattered. A symphony of chaos filled the air. Then silence, heavy, suffocating silence. He awoke to the smell of gasoline and the throbbing pain in his head. His vision swam, a kaleidoscope of blurry colours. Where was he? He tried to remember, but the memories were like smoke, elusive and fleeting. He touched his forehead, his fingers coming away sticky with blood. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog in his mind. His gaze fell upon the mangled remains of his car. It lay on its side, a crushed metal carcass. He was trapped. Panic surged, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He managed to kick open the jammed door, pulling himself free. He stumbled out, his legs shaky, and collapsed onto the asphalt. The world spun, the darkness at the edges of his vision threatening to consume him. As his eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the trees, he realized he was in the middle of nowhere. The road stretched endlessly in both directions, deserted and eerie. The wind whispered through the trees, a low, mournful sound. He could have sworn he heard his name being called, faint and distant. He shook his head, trying to clear the cobwebs of confusion. Was it the wind or something else? Shadows stretched and danced around him, growing longer as the sun began to set. He felt a chill run down his spine, a primal fear gripping him in its icy claws. He was alone, injured, and lost. Or was he? He found his phone lying a few feet away, its screen cracked. Miraculously, it still worked. He tried to call for help, but there was no signal, just static. He closed his eyes, willing himself to stay calm. Panic wouldn't help him now. He decided to follow the road, hoping to find help. With each step, the pain in his head intensified. He felt dizzy, disoriented. The whispering started again, this time closer, more insistent. He held the phone to his ear, straining to make out the words. They were faint, like whispers on the wind. Turn back. It's not safe. He pulled the phone away, his heart pounding in his chest. Was his mind playing tricks on him? He glanced over his shoulder, his breath catching in his throat. A figure stood silhouetted against the dying light, shrouded in shadow. He blinked, and it was gone. He was losing his mind. He had to get out of there. He stumbled upon his car keys lying on the ground. With trembling hands, he activated the remote start. The engine sputtered, then roared to life, the sound deafening in the stillness. He climbed in, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles white. As he turned the key in the ignition, his eyes darted to the rearview mirror. His blood ran cold. The figure was back, its face hidden in the shadows, but its eyes glowed with an eerie light. He slammed his foot on the accelerator, the car lurching forward. He didn't dare look back. He drove through the night, the image of the figure seared into his mind. The whispers in the static returned, louder now, more insistent. You can't escape. He's watching. He slammed his fist against the dashboard, his fear turning to anger. Who was he? What did he want? He drove until the sun began to rise, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. He found himself in a small town, its streets deserted. He pulled over, his body trembling with exhaustion. He stumbled into a diner, hoping for a cup of coffee and a moment of respite. But the diner was empty. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and something else, something metallic. Blood. He followed the trail of blood, his heart pounding in his chest. It led to a back room, the door slightly ajar. He pushed it open, his breath catching in his throat. The walls were covered in what looked like a giant tapestry woven from threads of different colours. But as he got closer, he realized with horror that the threads were not threads at all. They were veins, arteries, still pulsating, filled with blood. He stumbled back, his stomach churning. In the centre of the room, bathed in an ethereal light, sat a figure. It was hunched over a loom, its long bony fingers working furiously, weaving the tapestry of flesh and blood. The figure turned, its face hidden in the shadows of a wide-brimmed hat. But he could see its eyes glowing with an unnatural light, the same eyes he had seen in the rearview mirror. "You shouldn't have seen that," the figure rasped, its voice like dry leaves scraping against pavement. "Now you must become part of the tapestry." He tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He was rooted to the spot, frozen with terror. The figure rose from its seat, its long, sharp fingers reaching for him. He closed his eyes, bracing himself for the inevitable, but the pain never came. He opened his eyes to find himself lying in a hospital bed, tubes and wires snaking from his body. A nurse stood beside him, her face a mixture of concern and relief. "Nurse, you're awake," she said softly. "You've been in an accident. You're lucky to be alive." He tried to speak, but his voice was hoarse. He motioned towards his head. "Protagonist, the car, the figure, the tapestry," he croaked. The nurse frowned. "Nurse, you've been having nightmares," she said gently. "It's the head injury. It's common." He sank back against the pillows, his mind reeling. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination brought on by the head injury? He glanced at his hand, expecting to see blood, but there was nothing. He was safe. He was okay. Or was he? Days turned into weeks. He recovered from his injuries, but the nightmares persisted. The figure in the shadows, the tapestry of flesh and blood, the whispers in the static, they haunted his every waking moment. He tried to convince himself that it was all in his head, but deep down a seed of doubt remained. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, toying with him. One night, as he lay in bed, unable to sleep, he saw it again. The figure from his nightmares, standing at the foot of his bed, its eyes glowing in the darkness. "Weaver, you can't escape the tapestry," the figure rasped. "You are already one of the threads." He reached out to turn on the bedside lamp, but his hand froze. He slowly turned his gaze towards the bedside table. There, lying next to the lamp, was a single blood-stained thread. The figure in the shadows was real, the tapestry of flesh and blood was real, and he was somehow connected to it, a puppet on the weaver's loom. He had a choice to make. He could give in to the fear, let the weaver consume him, or he could fight back, unravel the threads of this nightmare, and confront the darkness that haunted him. He took a deep breath, his hand trembling as he reached for the blood-stained thread. He held it up to the light, examining it closely. It was then that he noticed something strange. The thread. It pulsed with a faint rhythmic beat. His beat. The realization hit him like a bolt of lightning. He wasn't just connected to the tapestry. He was the source. The weaver wasn't an external entity. It was him, a dark aspect of himself born from trauma and fear. He stared at the thread, his reflection staring back at him from the bloodstain. The face that stared back was no longer filled with fear, but with a dawning understanding. He was the weaver, and he always had been. The question was, what was he going to do about it? Would he embrace the darkness within, let it consume him and weave a tapestry of horror? Or would he find a way to control it, to mend the threads of his fragmented psyche and reclaim his life? The choice was his and his alone. What would you do?